Welcome into UGA Football Live with JC Shelton, where the dogs come to talk. All right, everybody, welcome in UGA Football Live with JC Shelton and Arthur Lynch, former Georgia tight end, co-host, analyst, barber extraordinaire. He's the man. We appreciate him, as always, jumping on, giving us that player insight. Artie, how are you, man? I hear you have a lot of good things going on, upgrading soon.
Yep. Good things. Good things. All good things are happening here in Chicago, Illinois. Right now it's 55 degrees and sunny, which is fantastic because a week ago, excuse me, not even a week ago, this Saturday morning I almost fell in the lake on my run because it was about 15 degrees, 10 degrees wind chill, ice everywhere, waves crashing. And when the waves are going up on the running walk, like river walk or lake shore area, like usually it's like basically running water, so it doesn't allow to freeze. But it was so cold that even though the water was piling up and moving back down to the lake, there was still a thin scope of ice, right? Layer of ice. So I thought it was just going to be like straight pavement that was wet. No, I'm talking about run, slip, fall. And like it was so icy that I was like slipping into the lake, caught my grip, turned around, went home. But other than that, ice is melted, sunny day, right? We're good. We're good. So all is well here in Chicago.
I love it. Don't mean to brag, but I kind of do. It's 71 degrees here. I'm feeling golf in my bones right now. But there's
Yeah.
so much work to do. I've got to justify being able to go and spend whatever $50 and spend 4 hours of my day doing that. So you got to find some time in there.
I
But Artie,
haven't hit a golf ball, or I haven't played a round of golf since like 2016. So that's one thing I don't miss because it's never really been in my life. Yeah.
gosh, man, I'm totally opposite. When I can, I like to get out there. I wanted to start it off on a high note today, Artie, because we do have a situation going on at UGA, and our thoughts and prayers are with the UGA family, and especially the families of Lake and Riley and Wyatt Banks, former Georgia students who unfortunately passed away. And we know there's a lot of things that's going into that right now, but we just want to share our thoughts. And Artie, I appreciate you willing to do that as well.
Yeah. Obviously, anytime any loss of life no matter at what stage in life, it's just a tragic and very sad situation. One thing I think that is evident about the UGA community writ large, right? Whenever we know how to celebrate together, and I think we also know how to mourn together, and we come together as a community. And I say we because you and I, obviously, both alums. I know we try to be unbiased here in this podcast, but we are pretty much homers, right? We both love the University of Georgia, the football program, but really the community that comes with it, which is the greater Athens community, and really the entire state of Georgia. And I think when we, lose, two young people, part of that community, and their lives were lost in complete, opposite ways, but still violent nonetheless. It's just, it's tragic. So I think I appreciate you kind of leading with that, and our thoughts and prayers do go out to their families and all the people affected by both this kind of senseless loss of life.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail right on the head there when you're talking about the community, the sense of fields. It's really the state too, because I've seen,
Mhm.
I have friends that, have nothing to do with UJ. Maybe they grew up an Ohio State fan, what have you. But they live in the state and they see something like this go on. They're always, pointing out, hey, the thoughts and prayers should be with them. We need to support the family and this time the community as a whole. So I think that's really evident in these times. And like you said, we celebrate together as well. But it just gives you an idea of how close the state is, and if something goes wrong in the state, everybody's there to help if they can. So I think that we need to appreciate that in this time. And it's hard to move on from something like that, Artie, but we're going to try here.
Mhm.
And guys, we're going to give you some insight into these assistant hires. Georgia's filled both roles in the span of a couple of days there. So we thought it was best to just wait for that to happen because we expected it to be really soon, right? With spring practice coming up, it's a huge time for development, right? And Artie and I, and especially Artie, he has that mindset and that experience to tell us how important spring practices are. And then having the coach and your position coach there is obviously a big part of that, right?
Huge.
So Georgia, they brought in James Coley to coach receivers. It's a familiar name, right? And you got Josh Crawford in here. That's not so familiar, really, in the head coaching space in college. He does have a lot of high school experience in the state of Georgia. We'll get to him second. We're going to start with James Coley. What first came to mind, Artie, when I heard about James Coley, and his name was really on the top of the search board from what I was reading and hearing from multiple people throughout this time when Brian McClendon eventually moved on to Tampa Bay a couple of weeks ago now. And I liked it. I didn't have any reservations really to it because I know he would be in a position role. I think the first thing that Georgia fans and what I posted on UGA Wire, the Instagram, so I kind of have a little bit of a feeling of what the fan base reacts to there by just reading the comments. I rarely do I read the comments, but on those I do just to see, because of course though, when you talk about social media, the haters are the ones that are going to speak up the most. A lot of people see
100%.
that. Yeah, a lot of people see that like, okay, cool, and then just move on. They don't respond to it, what have you. But the first negative things I heard brought up was, of course, his stint as OC, which was the lowest points per game total in Kirby Smart era. It was like 30.8. But here's the key: he's a receivers coach. All right, he's not going to be running the offense. Mike Bobo's got that. He's got that.
Yeah, which people are
Right.
still probably mad about, even though Bobo just shattered what's his name records. Never mind. Anyway,
His own record,
yeah,
I think, right? Didn't he eclipse his own record?
yeah, proceed, but yeah,
Yeah. But so that was really the negative thing that I saw. Okay. But I think, and Artie, you can take this where you want it as well, is the recruiting ties he has to the state of Florida. And we'll go through his background in a second. But just first thoughts on that, man. I love that. It's absolutely huge. You think, obviously, Kirby Smart looked at that as a very beneficial thing. His ties through he's coached at Florida State, he's coached in Miami, I mean, that tie in that area and that really receiver talent that comes out of the state of Florida is incredible. And I think that's a huge addition for Kirby.
yeah. Look, I mean, in college football, more than anywhere, anything else in any other sport, it's about recruiting, right? In you and I talked to a very close friend of mine, two of them actually, Dustin Royston and Christian Robinson, uh, both have new jobs. Christian Robinson, linebackers coach at University of Alabama, Crimson Tide, and my boy Dustin Royston is a defensive line, I believe, linebackers coach or defensive line coach at Murray State. Long story short, they would always highlight the fact that if you want to be an effective college coach and a hireable college coach, you got to be able to recruit, right? Some have like a geographic specialty, right? Some can just go into any different type of home, anywhere in the world, anywhere in the country, and be able to pull a kid out, right? But I think when you look at Coley and you look at some of the guys that he has coached and recruited, right? Duke Johnson comes to mind. If I remember, I believe Storm Johnson was his nickname. I believe he was the powerhouse over it's in my mind in Georgia, Dallas Lee, Colton Houston, Buford. Buford, I believe Duke Johnson was a Buford guy. I could be wrong. You'll have to correct me if I am, but he was a guy that went to University of Miami, running back, stud. You should know, or we should know at UGA, when we lose to anybody in a running back battle for recruiting, it means a lot because UGA obviously has a long history of running backs. And I think when we're thinking about Coley and his impact, right, geographically speaking, for Georgia to be at its best, right, we need to keep the best kids in state. And then in our bordering states, we have to compete for the 4 and 5 star guys in those states as well. That's the Carolinas, that's Alabama, and more so than any other state, probably in the country, that's the state of Florida, right? I know there's a huge debate that rages on who has the best high school football, Georgia and Florida, and I'm sure that people from Georgia have their opinions and people from Florida have theirs. But I'll tell you this: the best players I've ever played with, minus a few exceptions, but the best ones I've ever played with either came from Florida or either came from Georgia. And if you want to be an elite team that resides in either one of those states, you have to get the best and most talented guys from those states. I think James Coley will be able to do that because he's proven to be able to do that.
Yeah. And if you looking back, we'll talk about that really tied to the state of Florida. And, we mentioned how important it is, but you go back to even to the time when Florida State alum, coached there, went to Miami and coached for the Dolphins with Kirby Smart, 05 to 06. Then he coached guys like Christian Ponder, EJ Manuel, Jameis Winston on those offenses at Florida State. Um, I think it's impressive the different offenses he's been in that have done really well. You look back at we can point to again the James Coley, situation when Jim Chaney left for Tennessee and he jumped in there. That was a mess really on offense for Georgia in that time frame. And that move from Chaney to Tennessee was weird, absolutely weird. And then he kind of had to jump in there, feet to the fire first. Um, I think the experience that he has there and familiarity, once again, right? We're looking here at familiarity with Kirby Smart and that staff. He brings in a guy who's not only does he know and he's coached with in the past, he's been coaching for 20 years, a guy that he actually coached with in Athens as well, right? So already
Mhm.
knows the area and the guys on the staff, some of them that he already knows and has coached with in the past as well. I think it's a smooth move. I don't think Georgia's going to miss a beat, right? And I think one of the parts that we're looking for, I think we need to be looking at here as the spring football kicks off and headed into next fall is the receiver play and their mentality, their tenacity as blockers, which we love, and Georgia has really built the receiver core around that, right? Can you keep the same mindset from when Brian McClendon was running that, and he was pass game coordinator as well? We don't know exactly how much he was put into the game plans each week from that standpoint. It was just a title that Georgia was able to pay him more through. We don't know that for sure. But I think he's the experience he has. He can jump in there and help Mike Bobo absolutely. But I'm looking for that receiver play. Do they keep their same tenacity? Can we get those guys in space and it be explosive as well? Because Brian McClendon left a great mark for that receiver core. Lad McConkey might go in the first round. You got Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint right now about to go in, and he's gotten really a boost in the last month or so for his draft stock. And he's a guy who, like I said, that blocking situation, he was a great blocker first as a receiver at Georgia. And then the weapons around him, Brock Bowers, Ladd, Adonai Mitchell, when he was still at Georgia, those kind of took the priority. But then he comes back and has a great senior year as well, shows that development side. So I think that's something that we'll find out down the road with Coley. But I like it. I don't think there's much to be lined upon here. I think the other when you move on to Josh Crawford here, Artie, I think people at first when I was looking like again those comments, what
Mhm.
they were talking about was really like who is this, right? Because if you're a casual football fan, or even a really a Georgia stan, you're not really going to know who this guy is. And I knew the name. I needed to do research on him as well. I think like a lot of the writers and people around Georgia as well had to. I think the first thing and the most focused thing we should mention here is his ties to in-state recruiting in Georgia. We
Mhm.
talked about Coley really all around the country as a guy who's already been in Georgia, so he already has relationships with high school coaches because he recruited there for 4 years. But Crawford, his in-state ties as far as the high school level and such, how big do you think that is? Because that's my mind went to his relationship with the college with the high school coaches in the area, right? So the coaches trust him, and therefore he already has a little bit of trust there, almost pre-built with the players. In my mind,
Yeah, totally. First, I made a mistake on Duke Johnson. Darius Walker was the running back from Buford. I was thinking about who went to Notre Dame, so I apologize for that. And then Omar Hunter was the Buford D lineman that went to University of Florida. But to answer your question about this kind of idea of in-state ties, right? And I'm going to be curious when you're like, because his trajectory to coaching in the SEC is, I think, pretty unique, right? Obviously, there's been, I mean, tons and tons and tons of coaches who started at high school football. I mean, Dan Lanning famously was like a high school coach and then drove up to Pitt for his GA spot, right? Interview. But I do think this particular kind of, let's call it like career progression, I think we might start seeing a lot more of because of the emphasis that gets placed on high school football in states like Georgia, Florida, Texas, Ohio, maybe Pennsylvania, definitely California, right?
mm-hmm.
Where, you know, you kind of see these kind of the coaching carousel in high school football at Georgia is a thing, right? You see successful coaches going from one program to the next, right? And I think for Crawford, Crawford, he has had success at powerhouses across the state. And if you look at geographically speaking, where he has been in the state, that dude covered all four corners and then the heart of the state in Atlanta, right? That's not a
Mhm.
Kirby sees that, sees this individual's success at the high school level and be like, wait, you're telling me this guy can go into North Georgia, South Georgia, or inner city Atlanta? And anyone that knows the state of Georgia, those are three different worlds, right?
Yeah.
South Georgia and North Georgia are two different states, right? Atlanta is a different country compared to those two
Yeah,
places, right? You
absolutely.
like your emotional EQ has to be incredibly high to be able to go connect with kids, families, single moms, single parents, kids that come from households that don't have any parents, they live with their grandparents, right? People don't want to talk about these things because sometimes it's seen as like uncomfortable, but man, that's life, right? A lot of these kids come from different situations. You might come one kid might come from the air of a assisted living facility and come from a very well you know privileged background, and some kids might come from an orphanage, right? Like I'm speaking from my own experience of guys that I played with. And so as a coach, you have to
Yeah.
be able to connect with different families, different kids. And I think what Kirby sees is like, okay, Josh Crawford knows ball, right? Like he would not be able to get the jobs that he has had, particularly at Georgia Tech, which is an improving program. You and I talked about it in our preview of Georgia Tech this season.
Mhm.
So I think he's got the chops to mix it up X and O's. But Kirby sees this thing. He has built a great wall around Georgia, right? He takes it as a personal insult if he loses a 5-star or 4-star guy to an opposing, an out of
Yeah,
state powerhouse, right? And you look at any
absolutely.
successful head coach at any college anywhere, besides maybe like Notre Dame or USC, which kind of has this like cross state national appeal. But I look at Bill O'Brien. I know this isn't a BC podcast, but Bill O'Brien was just hired at Boston College. Boston College has been an unsuccessful, underperforming program for over 10 years because they got away from building a fence around New England, right? New England is obviously a collection of states, but BC is the New England team. Last time BC was very good was when they put a fence around New England, right? If you're a University of Florida head coach Billy Napier, why is he not having a ton of success? It's because a lot of the top guys are going out of state, or even worse, going to his in-state rival, right? I
Yeah.
think Kirby realizes, like, yes, he's plucked some guys from all over the country, right? No doubt. But if you want to be a national title contender from the state of Georgia at University of Georgia year in, year out, you got to find coaches who can go into any single type of household and get the best players, right? The 5 stars, and also make sure that you're not losing Ladd McConkey to a Georgia Southern or a Georgia Tech or an
Or
NC
Tennessee.
or Tennessee or NC
He was
State. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, right. And I think that's the most important thing as a college coach. Can you recruit at a high level? And if you can, I want you on our team. My guess is Josh Crawford can recruit at a high level.
Yeah, no, exactly. You talk about keeping him in state, and Kirby Smart, it feels like just almost every press conference we hear from him, and he's asked a recruiting question, it is straight in state. We got to keep the best players from
You
our
have to.
state in state and bring them to Athens. I mean, that's the key one to recruiting battles right there. You do that, you're going to have a good team. No matter if
100%.
you add, no matter if you add a Brock Bowers from California or you add a Ryan Puglisi from Cincinnati, right? I
Oh,
mean,
for New England.
oh, well, no, I mean he went to high school in Cincinnati,
No,
right?
he didn't. He went to Avon,
Or was it
Connecticut.
Connecticut?
Yeah.
Connecticut, same thing. C, it's a C word. Listen, um, but it's still my point still reigns true. Okay,
I'm just
um,
I'm just trying to get credit where credit is due to my boys because there's
no,
not
you
many
can.
of us, Coach. There's not many of
Good
us.
call. Good call. Good call. But my point was, yes, you keep those players in state, you're gonna have a good team either way. And I said Ladd McConkey because he said he would have committed to Tennessee if they offered him, but they didn't.
But he's a North Georgia guy,
Oops.
right?
Yeah, no, but he grew up a Tennessee fan, and
Yeah, see?
that was who he wanted. Yeah, exactly, right. But they kept him in state because they saw something there, and he's probably well, first round pick. I mean, everybody's going off about him, but that's it for another show. And actually for a show that's coming up, and I'll take this opportunity, folks, to
Plug
let you
it.
know, Artie and I are going to do a combine show, NFL Combine preview. As you may know, it's one of my favorite weeks. I don't know. I love the underwear Olympics. I don't know what that says about me, but I love watching these guys show out the combine, especially these players that we've covered for the last few years, really having their opportunity to shine on a national level in front of the NFL personnel. So Artie and I, as a guy who's been through the combine, Arthur's going to give us some insight into that. We'll release that show later this week as the combine really gets into full swing. So I'll let you know about that. Keep tabs on Twitter, UGA Wire, as always, in the Pulse Sports Network. Thank you for watching and listening. But I want to get back to Josh Crawford right here, and we'll wrap it up, Artie. So I think you look where he's coaching in high school, and you already mentioned it there, all four corners of the state. Greater Atlanta Christian, obviously in Atlanta, Jefferson County, Colquitt, Lee County, Valdosta. He's had success there as well. He took that opportunity, went to Western Kentucky as I think it was outside receivers coach, which is very niche. And he proved enough in 1 year to be jumped to offensive coordinator in 2022. And then his offense finished 15th in the country at Western Kentucky. He coached Jarrett Stearns, 150 catches, 1,902 yards, 17 touchdowns in 2 years. Mitchell Tinsley, 87 catches, 1,402 yards, 14 touchdowns. That was in 21 as outside receivers coach. I mean, that the rise there as a former running back at Morehouse, coaching receivers like that, that's very impressive. And I think that, Kirby Smart thinks about these. He has guys around him in that program who've coached a long time, analysts, everybody included in that program. I think this is obviously a smart new move for them, right? And I think that we need, for the UGA fans, maybe not singing, how does this happen? You hire a Georgia Tech receivers coach who's only been in the D1 level for 3 years over here, right, to coach running backs in a position where you lose Dale McGee, who's one of the best running backs coaches in the country, and gets his shot at Georgia State, which is awesome for him
Right.
because
And
I've
he'll
only
do well
heard
there.
great things.
Yep.
Oh yeah,
'Cause he can
absolutely. I mean,
recruit and he knows the state and so on and so forth, right?
exactly. And I've heard nothing but good things about him from the players, unprovoked. Really, they weren't asked. They just bring it up, all right, how important he is as a man, right? Like trying to mold them and get them prepared for the next 40, 50 years of their life, what have you. But also on the field. And I think the amount of players he's recruited into Georgia, and I tweeted the other day, it was just an incredible list of guys who were almost all in the NFL, and multiple are about to be, and Kendall Milton, Dejon Edwards, and those guys as well.
Dude,
Great,
left and right.
yeah. But you got big shoes to fill, right? For Josh Crawford,
But to that
and
point, with the Josh Crawford, right? Like, and again, like I don't want to like I'm not trying to be a hot take or anything like this or be controversial, but Josh Crawford is a young African American football coach who's a fast riser in the college football game, right? Went to Morehouse College, right? And it's like again, you're talking about young men when they start getting recruited at 14 or not even young men, boys, 14, 15, 16 years old, right? And like unsure, a lot of things are pulling them different ways, right? We don't know what family dynamics they come from, right? I mean, for me personally, I grew up in a single parent home, raised by a single mom. So it's like when Coach Rick, Mike Bobo, and John Lilly walked into my home, I immediately looked at them like these are going to be like I hope father figures to me, right? And fortunately, all three of them to this day still are role models of mine. But I guess what I'm saying is Kirby understands this, right? Kirby's emotional like IQ is very high, or emotional EQ, or however you want to call it, right? And Josh Crawford is a guy that went to Morehouse College, right? Morehouse is one of the most recognizable institutions our country has to offer. It's an HBCU, and again one of the most prestigious HBCUs out there. And I think for him, that comes with an instant level of credibility. He has his master's degree from University of Georgia. He's a young, bright individual, and then he found a very unique way to rise the ranks in college coaching. So players are going to be able to relate to him immediately, right? White, black, doesn't matter what types of players, but they're going to kind of see like, oh, this guy grinded his way up. He is a young, charismatic guy who understands how to connect with players. Why? Because he was a college football player, Granted, it was at Morehouse. It wasn't at Alabama or Georgia. Doesn't matter, right? He knows what it takes to play at a college level. So I think like when you're evaluating coaches as a head coach in Kirby, you're not just being like looking at his resume, be like, okay, check, check, check. No, what did each stop along the way in that resume do for this coach, and how did this coach succeed there, right? And I think anytime it's there is a science behind it, right? Every coach that Kirby picks, and every coach that the really successful head coaches picks is not doing it to satisfy the fan bases. He's doing it to solve a problem, right? Or solve a need. And I think when you see Josh Crawford, you have a young, charismatic, really sharp individual who's going to be able to connect with players because A, he's coached the high school players at a number of different programs, and then B, was able to recruit those high school players or similar type high school players to different colleges, Western Kentucky, Georgia Tech, and then help those players grow into impact players. That's like a very
Yeah,
unique resume and one that I think will translate well at University of Georgia.
I agree, and I think I don't want to put those expectations on him this early, but it reminds me so much of Dale McGee and what he did at a high school level before he got a shot
Garber
at
Columbus, right?
college. Exactly, right? Built him into a powerhouse,
Dude,
and it
that
just
dude.
reminds me so much of him, his
Mhm.
connections with it in the state. So I like it. I like it. Like, but we don't have a lot of evidence to go off of from the D1 level, so I get it. I get it. But I think with the guys, the other guys in the room, I think having Todd Hartley, right, to kind of help get their feet wet, at least as a
Yep.
Georgia University of Georgia recruiter, is huge now.
Mhm.
So I think they lean on him a little bit, lean on Mike Bobo, obviously.
Stacy
Kirby
Searle's
Smart, Will
been there for
Muschamp, okay.
years.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point as well. Stacey Searles having an elder statesman like Stacey in there. So I think he has the guys around him to really get him jump started here. And I think another thing is it's important for these guys, I think, to really have that state tie because we already talked about in-state recruiting and stuff like that. So I like the move overall. And I think you said it. One more thing I'll add on him. You said he was sharp, and I did take a brief, maybe 10 minutes to watch a little coaching clinic he did. I can't. It wasn't clear like when he did that, but it looked like when he was at Western Kentucky. Um, but he said a lot of good things that
Yep.
I think me and you have grown accustomed to what works well in an offense and what Mike Bobo and the University of Georgia and other offenses that are really playing well right now do well, and shifts, motions, getting players in space, being innovative and not really telling your cards from the snap. At least preset for the defense to see what you're doing. I liked all of that. It made sense to me, and I think that may be a sign to why he's made the rise that he has. Is from beyond just a guy, relationship builder and recruiter as well, but on the field and schematically, it looked like he said some really good things that were interesting to me.
It's also important to realize, and you see this in the NFL all the time, right? And again, my short stint in the NFL was a couple cup of coffees. I was not a Pro Bowler. I was nothing, really nothing, practice player. But was there long enough to kind of see the different dynamics of good teams versus bad teams and like good hiring practices versus bad hiring practices, right? I think what you see it with the Detroit Lions under Dan Campbell, who I had the opportunity to play for when he was a tight ends coach in Miami Dolphins. He looks for a specific type of person who has a blend of coaching experience and playing experience, right? And voila, he's turned the Detroit Lions into a playoff team and really a Super Bowl contender, let's be honest. But
Mhm.
there are some other guys that I came across who just had a 20-year NFL career. And to be honest, they didn't know their left between their right in terms of like strength of formation and weak formation, right? I think really good head coaches, they look for talent in their coaches the same way they look for talent in their players, right?
Mhm.
Like, what can these guys do really exceptionally well, and where can they grow, and how can I help them grow into a better player, or in this instance, a better coach? I think
Yeah.
Kirby, the way he recruits players, that's how he looks at coaches as well. Yeah, there's been connections with Mike Bobo and Stacey Searles in the past, but those guys were independently successful in their own right, and he realized that they could come on and be value add to the program. But I think when he's looking at young coaches, right? Whether it was Todd Hartley before, coming from Miami, he saw what Todd Hartley had grown into, and now look at Todd Hartley, right? I think he looks at Josh
Absolutely.
Crawford the same. He's like, if I don't pluck Josh Crawford from Georgia Tech now, I'm going to lose players to Josh Crawford at Georgia Tech in the next 3 years. I imagine that's how Kirby's thinking, right? Yes, Josh Crawford is very smart, but he's smart in how he chooses to navigate his career. And he saw this opportunity at Georgia and jumped at it. And I think we have to give credit where credit is due to Kirby, is he saw the talent in Josh Crawford, like, hey, let's call this guy up and get him before he becomes a thorn in our ass, which I'm sure he was going to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. So first thing for these guys, Coley and Crawford, getting relationships built with these recruits and their players right now as we're heading into spring practice. Huge moment for them to get a jump start here in this tenure for Coley and his new school for Crawford and his new opportunity that's really huge in the SEC. Artie and I will be back this week again. We're doing NFL Combine, like I told you. Thanks so much for watching and listening. You get your own podcast or the Pulse Sports Network on YouTube. If you haven't checked it out now, Bo Gardner last week, UCLA long snapper transfer. We had video issues, so we just posted it as a podcast version. So go check it out. It's really good. I love his mindset. Me and Artie both agreed on that. Until next time, it'll be soon. Artie, appreciate you, man.
Likewise, man. Always good to see you. Always good to talk to you. And go Dogs.